Howdy, partners. Western author Mark L. Redmond back here with you for another installment in my first chapter series. We're working our way through The Adventures of Arty Anderson. It's a middle grade series, 6 books, set in post-Civil War Texas. Centers around young Arty Anderson and his mother, plus all the friends and the ranch hands that they meet after they move from Ohio to Texas. There's an interesting story behind the chapter that I'm going to be reading today. Behind this book. The book is Arty's Long Day. And as many of you know, I was an English teacher for almost 30 years back in Indiana. And after the third book in the series, Arty and the Texas Ranger, 2 of my former students that had gotten married and had a daughter sent me an email from her, or let her email me. She had been reading the series and she really enjoyed it, but I got an email from her saying, "Is there any way, Mr. Redmond, that you could give Esther a bigger part in the next book? I really enjoy the books that you're writing." And I thought, how can I say no to a request like that? So in this book, Arty's Long Day, Esther has a much larger part in the book. And I don't want to give away too much, but Arty gets into a life and death situation in the book with one of his friends and really needs some help from somebody else. And Esther is the one who gives him that help. I hope you'll enjoy the first chapter of this book. This is Arty's Long Day. Again, you can find these books on Amazon or at my website, marklredmond.com. And I think if you haven't read them yet, you need to grab one. I think you'll enjoy it and maybe want to read the rest of them. I don't know. This is chapter 1. All 3 stood there, gawking and grinning at us. I should have expected some teasing, since Esther Travis was riding beside me. Never mind that Tom Green and Jasper Wilson were riding behind us. "Ain't that Arty the kid and his gang?" asked Bo Smith. He whipped off his dusty Stetson and held it close to his chest with both hands. He stood there, broad-shouldered and well over 6 feet tall, and tried to look scared. I reckon it is," said the shorter, slim Chad Hart, our leather-tough top hand. "They can't be out on a raid, though." He elbowed Bill Munson, our bull-necked, bearded foreman who stood next to him. "Arty has a lady with him." "Oh, I hear he always takes her along on his raids," said Bill. "Now, why would he take a lady on his raids?" Bo asked. "2 reasons," Bill replied. "First, he takes her along to protect the rest of his gang. That little lady is pretty, but she's also tough. Second, the gang rides a fair piece sometimes." He winked at Esther, but still didn't smile. "And I hear she's the only one that can find her way back home." Tom started laughing first. Then Bo slapped his Stetson against his leg and started laughing. Jasper, Esther, Bill, and Chad joined them. I held on till I thought I was going to bust, and then I had to laugh too. A few minutes later, when we had stopped laughing, someone tapped my shoulder. Jasper had ridden his mule forward and stopped it beside Prince. Leaning toward me in his saddle, he whispered so loud that even the hands couldn't help hearing, "Arty, why was that funny?" When I had stopped laughing a second time, I looked as sternly as I could at the 3 men leaning against the corral fence and said quietly, "Pack your bedrolls, boys. You're all fired." I waved for my friends to follow me and bumped Prince with my heels. "Let's ride." "Just a minute, partner." Bill said. I pulled gently on Prince's reins and turned in the saddle. Mind if I ask where you folks are headed? He asked. We're going for a ride, I said. I guessed that from seeing the horses, he replied. Where are you headed? South 40, I mumbled, turning Prince away from Bill. That's rough country, said Bill. Are you sure? I can handle it, I said over my shoulder. Now, I knew better than to interrupt a grown person, even when I was riled. I felt like I'd just stepped in a cow pie. I wanted to back up a step, but it was too late now. It wasn't you I was thinking about, he said quietly. I'm sorry, I said, turning Prince back toward Bill. I just feel like a little kid when I have to tell you where I'm going and what I'm planning to do. He asked Bo and me the same, and all the other hands the same question before we ride off for the day, partner, said Chad. He walked over and patted Prince's neck. Then he looked me right in the eyes and said, The Circle A covers a lot of territory, and there's no telling what could happen to even the best riders if someone doesn't show up when he's supposed to. The rest of us had better know where to start looking. You're right, I said. We want to do some exploring. I haven't seen much of the southern section of the ranch. That's why we thought we'd head for the southwest corner. We'll be careful, and we won't ride where the country's too rough. We plan to be back by sundown. I trust your judgment, partner, Bill said. Just remember the things we've taught you. For the first 5 minutes of our ride, Jasper and Tom were the only ones talking. I rode looking straight ahead. My ears were burning, and I had that same old knot in my stomach that I always got when I was upset. Being foolish in front of Jasper and Tom was embarrassing. Being foolish in front of Esther was, well, I would rather have eaten a live tarantula. I could feel her looking at me. Sometimes I reckon she could see right through me into my heart. Esther and her family had been coming to the ranch for Sunday dinner about every other week. After dinner, Ruth and Mary, Esther's younger sisters, would clear the table and then go outside to play. The grown folks would take a walk, sit on the front porch, or go to the parlor, depending on the weather or just on what they wanted to do. Esther and I washed and dried the dishes and talked as good friends talk. We spoke about what was in our minds, ranching, school, friends, and other things. One of those other things usually wound up being my spiritual life. I hated talking about sin in my life, but I knew it was there. Esther knew it was there too. She most often brought up my being angry with God over losing Pa. She was never unkind or preachy, but she wasn't shy about speaking when she spoke out. More than anyone else, she made me see that I had to accept Pa's death as God's will. While she washed the dishes and talked, I dried them and listened. Esther had made me see that my being angry with God had stopped me from growing spiritually. It had also stopped God from hearing my prayers. I had been working hard at changing my attitude and accepting God's will. Now, I had played the fool, not only in front of Esther, but also in front of Tom, who wasn't even a Christian. I'm proud of you, Arty, she whispered. I grabbed the saddle horn to keep from falling off Prince. Why? I asked. Because I did such a good job of making a fool of myself back there? I still couldn't look at her. No, she answered. Because when you saw that you were wrong, you apologized and made things right. Everybody does wrong from time to time. How you handle your mistakes show what you really are. I'm also proud of you because you used that silver tongue of yours to persuade Tom's parents to stop babying him and finally let him do something with the rest of us. Getting him to see his need for Jesus as his Savior is nearly impossible if we only see him at school. There was a time when you were too bitter to be concerned about anyone else. You've changed since we first met, and I really am proud of you. Now, are we going to enjoy today? I looked at her and grinned. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to throw my hat in the air and holler, but instead I just thanked God for giving me such a good friend. The morning was perfect for a ride. Prince was feeling frisky, and if I had been riding alone, I would have let him run. Esther would have had no trouble keeping up. She was as good a rider as me. Well, almost as good. I had saddled one of our gentle mares for Tom because he hadn't ridden much. In fact, Tom hadn't been allowed to do anything much since he'd moved to White Rock. A year or so before his family had come west, Tom's older brother had been killed while climbing on some rock formation with his friends. I knew what the family had gone through, and I reckon I understood why they were so jumpy about letting Tom out of their sight. From Tom's first day at school, I had felt that we were going to be pards. At school, he had fit in just fine, and all of us liked him. A dozen or more times during the school year, I had invited him to the ranch. He had been allowed to come once for supper with his parents. They were not about to lose their other son. When they had brought Tom to the ranch yesterday, they had insisted on seeing the horse that Tom was going to ride. For a few minutes I was afraid they were going to take him back home. Esther was right. Although she, Jasper, and I had been praying that Tom would get saved, we needed to talk to him too. Anyway, back to why I couldn't let Prince take off across the prairie. Jasper's riding was getting better all the time, but then I had seen him fall off a chair. I wasn't about to let him try a galloping mule unless there was a really good reason. Thanks for inviting me to come along, Arty, said Tom. Spending the night at your house with you and Jasper was a great idea. We got an earlier start this way, and, well, I've never done anything like this before. Where are we going? Nowhere special, I reckon, I answered. I've spent most of my time in Coyote Canyon or at my fishing hole to the north. I want to see what this corner of the ranch looks like. If you've never been where we're going, said Jasper, how will you know when we get there? I looked at Esther. She was smiling. We'll probably ride until sometime around noon, she said. Then we'll find a nice place for a picnic, eat this delicious dinner that Arty's grandmother packed, and then head for home. She pulled the brim of her hat down a little and looked at me. Am I right? Yep, I answered. Since we have the whole day, we can stop to look at anything that's interesting. Keep your eyes open. For what? Asked Jasper. Anything you want to investigate, I said. Oh, we're looking for evidence again, aren't we? Shielding his eyes with his hand, Jasper stood in his stirrup, stretched out his long neck, and started looking around. This looked like a good place for a... No, Jasper, I interrupted. We're not looking for evidence. We found all the evidence I ever hoped to find when we went to Coyote Canyon a while back. That's another reason I wanted to ride this way today. What about special men? Asked Jasper. Tom and me brung empty cartridge boxes to put them in, and Tom and I brought, I said. I shrugged my shoulders and smiled at Tom. Jasper rode beside me, looking at me and shaking his head. Well now, Mr. Arty the Smarty, he said, you interrupted me to tell me that what you and Tom brought with you, but you can't remember what it was, can you? I looked first at Tom, then at Esther. Both were looking at the sagebrush in opposite directions, their bodies shaking with laughter. I gave up. What are special men? I asked. Jasper looked surprised. Don't you pay attention in school? He asked. Miss Ross asked us to bring special men to look at when we go back to school. I got a mess of them. Given a little time, I could usually figure out what Jasper was talking about. This time, I had lost his trail. Esther leaned toward me in her saddle and whispered, specimens. Oh, now I remember, I said. We want to watch for them for sure. I wouldn't have traded a $20 gold piece for the satisfied smile on Jasper's face right then. Esther and I laughed so hard and so often that morning that it's a wonder we didn't fall off our horses and break some bones. And that, my friends, is Chapter 1 of Arty's Long Day. And even though it's off to a really good start, by the time it's over, it has been a really long day. But you're going to have to read the book to find out what makes it a long day. And I hope you'll do just that. Again, if you had fun with this reading, I know I'm having fun. If you had fun, click the subscribe button at the bottom of the page and join my posse. Go by marklredmond.com and sign up to join my posse, and you'll start getting regular emails that keep you up on the new things that I'm writing, on what's going on in our family life, and all kinds of things about the Old West. I would love to have you join. Of course, if you're a minor, you need to get your parents' permission first, but I think the whole family find what's there fun. That's all for now. Thank you. Come back and see me again, and we'll take a look at the next book in the first chapter series.